Some secrets are meant to be buried. And that was exactly what Daniel, a devout husband, did to his best friend and cheating wife. Daniel Miller was born in a quiet town in Los Angeles to a family of 6. His father, Robert Cole Miller, was a notorious drunk and drug addict, and he raised David and his siblings in a crude and stern manner. Robert was a construction foreman. He was a provider and a disciplinarian, and David grew up very early, learning to take financial responsibilities and become a man of his own. From an early age, Daniel learned that nothing in life came easy. He spent his summers working under his father, mixing concrete, hauling bricks, learning the trade whether he wanted to or not. Daniel wasn't the kind of kid who stood out. He wasn't the loudest in the room, wasn't the smartest or the most charismatic. But he was a hard worker, reliable, the kind of person people leaned on without realizing they were doing it. By the time he was 17, he was already taller than his father, his shoulders broad from years of labor. While other kids were out chasing dreams, Daniel was laying bricks. He never complained. Not when his father made him take over projects. Not even when he looked at his friends, people like Nicholas Maddox, his childhood best friend, who had their eyes set on something bigger. The summer after high school, Daniel's father suffered a stroke. It was sudden, brutal, and their family changed overnight. The once indestructible man was reduced to someone fragile, someone who needed help to do even the simplest tasks. The weight of the family fell squarely on Daniel's shoulders. He never asked for it. But there was no one else. So, he took over. At 19, Robert Cole passed away and he ran the family business, managing crews of men twice his age. By the time he turned 24, Daniel had become a lot like his late father. But unlike Robert, Daniel didn't go down the lane of being a drug addict. He stayed clean. He picked a bitter life. But little did he know that a certain summer would steal away the perfect life he'd built for years, ending him behind bars with a life sentence. Daniel Miller met Emily Lawson when he got his first job at the city's largest construction site. Without any college education, he wasn't working behind the desk but in the fields. Emily Lawson was everything Daniel wasn't. She was lively, ambitious, and filled with excited energy. Born and bred in South Dakota, she had moved to town after high school, taking a job at the grocery shop, where she crossed paths with him over a lunch break. It wasn't a whirlwind romance. There were no grand gestures, no dramatic declarations. It was slow. Steady, just like him. They built a life together. A home. For the first time, Daniel felt like he had something that belonged to him, not just something he had inherited or been forced into. He had Emily Lawson. And for a while, that was enough. But nothing stays perfect forever. Nothing stays buried forever. Their love wasn't about grand gestures or poetic words. It was about showing up, about doing the work, about choosing each other even when things got hard. And things did get hard. Their first few years as husband and wife were tight. Daniel worked harder than ever, taking on extra shifts at the site, picking up side jobs whenever he could. His body ached, his hands were raw, but he didn't complain. Emily did her part, too. She picked up a night shift at a 24-hour grocery store just outside town. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. And slowly, things got better. The debts shrank and, in time, their family grew. Emily and Daniel had 2 lovely kids, Oliver and Emma. And finally, their little girl, Sophie, their precious little princess. Emily still worked nights, but Daniel made sure to be home in the evenings, cooking dinner, helping with homework, telling bedtime stories. He wanted to be a good father for his kids. A man better than his own father had been. For a while, life was good. Not perfect, but good. Then, everything changed. And it all started with a phone call. One Thursday afternoon, Daniel's phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but the voice on the other end took him straight back to his teenage years. Nicholas Maddox. Nicholas had been his best friend once, back in high school, before life pulled them in different directions. While Daniel had stayed in town, laying foundations both figuratively and literally, Nicholas had left, chasing adventure. He had traveled, married, divorced, remarried, divorced again and moved across the world. Now, after all those years, he was back. Daniel was surprised to hear from him. More surprised to learn he was staying in town for a while. They arranged to catch up, and later that evening, after work, they met at the construction site. Nicholas was still the same man from many years ago. Charming, unpredictable, full of stories about places Daniel had only seen in magazines. It felt good to talk to someone who remembered him from before. From before the long hours, before the responsibilities. That night, Daniel got home later than usual. Emily was still awake, and when she asked, he told her about Nicholas, how he had come back after all these years. Emily was intrigued. Daniel had never been the type to have many close friends, so the sudden reappearance of one from his past was unexpected. She suggested inviting him over for dinner. Daniel agreed. He had no idea that an innocent invitation to his home would destroy everything he'd ever worked for and end him in jail. The next evening, after work, Daniel brought Nicholas home. At dinner, the kids were instantly drawn to him. He had that effortless charm, the kind that made people listen to him. They asked him endless questions, fascinated by his stories of mountain climbing, sailing across the world, fancy jobs and concerts. Oliver, Emma and Sophie adored him. And Emily laughed for the first time in forever. Not just polite laughter. Not the kind that came from social courtesy. It was a real, genuine laughter, the kind that lit up her face, made her eyes shine in a way Daniel hadn't seen in years. Dinner stretched long into the evening. When it was finally over, Nicholas thanked Emily for the meal, shook Daniel's hand, and promised to catch up again soon. It should have ended there. It should have been a lovely dinner that ended beautifully, but it didn't. It was the beginning of something else. Something that would end in 2 murders and a man broken for life. A few nights later, during one of Emily's shifts at the grocery store, Nicholas walked in. She hadn't expected to see him. He had a few things in his cart, a bottle of water, a protein bar, something for an upcoming hiking trip. Emily was still intrigued by his adventurous spirit, and again, he made her laugh. But it didn't end with the second meeting. Nicholas started showing up more often. At first, it was harmless. A quick visit, a friendly smile, a few words spoken. Then he started bringing coffee for her breaks. Then coffee turned into pastries. A slice of cake, just because he thought she'd like it the last time. Then flowers, a simple bouquet wrapped in brown paper. A joke, at first. Then, a habit. One moment led into the next. Conversation stretched for longer than necessary. And then an irreversible line was crossed. Something neither of them could undo. Emily never intended for it to happen. At first, it was innocent, fun. An exciting secret she wanted a taste of. Just one night with an exciting man wouldn't hurt. Would it? Emily hadn't realized how much she missed feeling wanted, feeling seen, feeling like a beautiful woman rather than just a mother. Daniel was a good husband. A great father. He worked hard, loved his family, did everything right. But their life had become too predictable, too routine. Days stretched into weeks, weeks into years, and somewhere along the way, she had stopped feeling like Emily and had started feeling like just a wife, just a mother, just someone holding everything together. Nicholas reminded her she was more than that. She told herself it was harmless. That she was just enjoying the fleeting fun and Daniel would never find out. But one night turned to two and then another night. And another. What began as an escape became a necessity. She lived for those moments now, lived for the thrill of sneaking away, of stepping into a world where she wasn't drowning in responsibilities. Nicholas made her feel desired, reckless, alive. And Daniel never suspected a thing. He trusted her. He never questioned the long hours at the grocery store, the late shifts she claimed to pick up. They needed the money, after all. The bills were still there, the mortgage still had to be paid, and if she wanted to work extra, he wouldn't stand in her way. He didn't realize she was slipping away. Nicholas, too, had changed. The easy friendship they once had felt strained, distant. He stopped coming around as much, stopped dropping by the construction site. Daniel chalked it up to Nicholas being restless, always chasing the next adventure. He never once considered that Nicholas had already found it, right under his roof. Months turned into a year. The kids barely saw Emily anymore. Sophie started asking why Mommy always worked at night. Oliver cried when Emily left for her shifts. Daniel reassured them, told them their mother was doing what was best for the family. He didn't see what was happening. Not until the night he sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at an untouched plate of food, listening to his children cry for their mother. That was the night he decided it had to stop. Daniel couldn't do it anymore. He had spent years working himself to the bone to build a life for his family, and now it was slipping away right in front of him. He decided that night that he'd had enough. She should come home and remain home. She didn't need to work the overnight shift anymore. He would pick up more jobs, do whatever it took. He just wanted her home. The next morning, when Emily finally walked through the door, looking exhausted, he sat her down. He told her he missed her. That the kids missed her. That she didn't have to work so much anymore. But Emily refused. She said she needed to work. That Daniel's construction job wasn't enough. That she wanted to contribute, to provide, to make things easier. Daniel insisted, told her he'd handle everything. But Emily stood her ground. She wanted to keep working. The conversation turned tense quickly. She was defensive, unusually so. She claimed she wanted independence, that she liked working, that it gave her purpose. Daniel let it go, he didn't want to fight. Instead, he went to work, deciding they could work it out later. At the construction site, he did something he hadn't done in months, he called Nicholas. They hadn't talked much lately, not since Nicholas had started keeping his distance. Daniel needed a friend, someone to help him make sense of what was happening. Nicholas listened. He told Daniel not to worry, that Emily was probably just trying to help, that he should be grateful to have such a supportive wife. Daniel felt guilty for doubting her. That evening, when he got home, he apologized and told her she could keep working if it made her happy. She smiled, kissed him on the cheek, and said everything was fine. But something still didn't feel right. The next night, Daniel came home early, so he decided to surprise her. On the way to the grocery store, he picked up a cheap bottle of wine, a pack of her favorite cookies. He wanted to spend time with her. Maybe they could talk, reconnect. Maybe things could go back to the way they used to be. But when he pulled into the grocery store parking lot, something was wrong. Her car wasn't there. Inside, he asked the night attendant if Emily was working. The man gave him a confused look, said Emily hadn't taken the night shift in months. Daniel stood there, frozen, as the realization sank in. If she wasn't working, then where was she? He drove home in silence, the wine and cookies untouched in the passenger seat. When Emily returned in the morning, he didn't say anything. He didn't ask. Instead, he made a plan. Daniel decided to follow his wife. He called in sick and left work early. That evening, as Emily kissed the kids goodbye and left for her night shift, he waited. When her car pulled out of the driveway, he followed. He trailed her down the unfamiliar road until she reached a quiet neighborhood, a place Daniel had never been before. She parked outside an apartment building. Walked up to the door and knocked. The man who answered made Daniel's stomach drop. It was Nicholas Maddox. His best friend. He watched as his wife slipped inside, closing the door behind her. His fingers tightened around the steering wheel. He called her phone. Once. Twice. 3 times. No answer. He didn't confront them. Didn't storm inside. He simply drove home, parked the car and sat in the darkness with his kids sleeping beside him. He knew his life would never be the same. When Emily returned the next morning, he played along. Pretended nothing had changed. He asked about work and she kissed him on the cheek. Told him work had been fine. He smiled. And then, casually, he mentioned Nicholas. Daniel said he was thinking of inviting him over for dinner. That Nicholas was leaving town soon. Emily's reaction was instant. Her face paled, her hands tensed. And then, without thinking, she said it. Nick is leaving town. Daniel didn't respond. Because in that moment, he had all the confirmation he needed. She had betrayed him. She was now calling Nicholas by an endearment. Nick. For a man she'd met just once, it was the surest confirmation that she had betrayed him. Love is a beautiful emotion, but betrayal shatters the trust and bond of marriage. The life Daniel Miller had built, the perfect family he had worked so hard to create, was broken right before his eyes. What could he do? Who should he talk to? But Daniel was not a man of many words. He was a man of action. And in that instant, he decided. Someone had to pay the price for their betrayal. Who would it be? His wife? His best friend? Or both? It had been a year. A whole year of lies, sneaking around, whispered phone calls, and nights spent alone while Emily claimed to be working late at the grocery store. A whole year of Nicholas, his best friend, his brother and confidant, avoiding him, suddenly too busy to grab a drink or watch the game. Daniel should have known. He should have seen the signs. But he had been too trusting. Too blind. Too stupid. The next day, Daniel went to work as if nothing had happened. He lifted heavy beams, mixed concrete, and pretended that the world wasn't collapsing around him. But at lunch, staring into the deep pit in the middle of the construction site, where a new concrete pillar was supposed to be poured, he had an idea. A dark, twisted idea. And once it took root, it would not let go. That evening, he called Nicholas and invited him for dinner. He hesitated, but Daniel insisted. "The kids miss you," he said. Finally, Nicholas agreed to show up. That night, dinner was smooth. Emily and Nicholas acted like nothing was going on between them. Emily said she hadn't seen Nicholas in forever. Asking why he didn't come to visit his friend, Daniel, often. Lies. Daniel clenched his jaw, forced himself to smile. And then, as they finished their meal, he leaned back in his chair. "There's something I want to show you both. A project I've been working on at the site. I'd love your opinion." Nicholas agreed, eager to leave the awkward setting. But Daniel told Emily to come along to the construction site too. He said Emily always had an eye for detail. She should see it too. Excitedly, they agreed. They got into the car, driving in silence. And they had no idea what was coming. The construction site was eerily quiet at night. And Daniel led them to the top. A gaping pit lay before them, deep and dark. Daniel stood at the edge, looking down. "Most people don't understand the sacrifices it takes to build something lasting," he said. "The work. The patience. The trust. Some people know nothing of trust." Emily shifted uncomfortably at his tone. Saying they should head home, she had to tuck the kids into bed. "The kids won't need you anymore." Daniel sneered, and then, he shoved her. But Nicholas was faster. He grabbed her and tried to stop her fall. But Daniel wouldn't have it. He shoved Nicholas into the gaping pit, his scream filling the air as he landed in the unseen depth. Emily, realizing what Daniel was doing, ran, fighting for her life. But she wasn't fast enough. And neither was she strong enough. Daniel wrestled his petite wife to the ground and punched her. Punch after punch after punch. She pleaded, she begged. But Daniel broke her arm, smashed her head against a boulder, and while she was still breathing, threw her into the pit with Nicholas. There was silence, and then the hiss of the concrete mixer filled the air as Daniel pulled the lever, watching as thick, wet cement poured into the hole, swallowing their bodies whole. Nicholas screamed, struggled. But it was swallowed by the gun of the machine and the depth of the pit. By morning, the foundation would be set. The perfect revenge. Raised beyond betrayal. And buried secrets. Unfortunately, Daniel didn't get away with his crimes. A few days later, the case of Emily Lawson's disappearance was officially filed at the local police station. At first, there were no leads, just a missing wife, a worried husband, and a community that had no reason to suspect anything sinister. Then shortly after, a concerned neighbor and gym mate called that Nicholas Maddox was missing with his car parked in the front yard, untouched. Both were missing. Both had a relationship with Daniel. And that's when the suspicions grew. Construction workers began to talk. Some mentioned how Daniel had been acting strangely, recalling that he had poured the concrete late at night, long after the rest of the crew had gone home. And then, there was Emily's co-worker. The night shift attendant at the grocery store. He testified that Emily had not been working night shifts for months like she claimed. He told the police that Daniel might have suspected an affair. When the investigators returned to the construction site, they ordered the excavation of the newly set pillar. And beneath the hardened cement, they found them. Emily and Nicholas. buried in the foundation of the building Daniel had worked so hard to construct. There was no trial, no lengthy denials. When confronted with the evidence, Daniel simply bowed his head. He pleaded guilty, accepting a life sentence for his crimes. Daniel lost his life, freedom and family all in a fit of rage. All because he invited the wrong friend for dinner. This is not just a story of betrayal. It is a story of how love, when twisted by pain, can turn into something dark, violent, and merciless. In that moment of darkness, Daniel did not see his wife and best friend. He saw only their betrayal. And in his desperate attempt to make them pay, he destroyed himself in the process. And this is the tragedy of a love that was once pure, now buried beneath concrete and regret.